As I have mentioned before, Season 7 was the last one before post-production became practical. So, Simpson would pre-record a set of tracks for the director to place during telerecording. In the event, the production of Spearhead from Space suffered from industrial action, a strike, which prevented the usual recording onto videotape in a BBC studio. Producer Derek Sherwin countered by having the entire thing made on location and on film. Simpson ended up recording his music after film wrapped. Thus, this story was, in a sense, the first post-production production. It does seem to me that Simpson composed his music in the normal pre-production way, because the decision to film came only a couple of weeks before studio recording was originally scheduled, and he would have to have been ready. Yet, for this track, Simpson does a fine job matching his music to much of the anticipated action. Simpson's orchestration for 8 musicians includes, in Meteorites In Formation, flute, clarinet, trumpet, horn, cello, guitar, vibraphone, tambourine, and timpani. There is either another trumpet, another horn, or a third brass instrument as well, but my ears aren't skilled enough to tell for sure. This is Simpson's last score using the trumpet. He later elected to make the horn the sole brass representative in his ensembles, for they can be strong as well as subtle. Hopefully you've had a chance to watch both of my Season 2 behind-the-scenes videos, which documented the transcription process of the early parts of this piece. The introduction is made of 3 elements which stack on top of each other. First, timpani and cello play low A natural. After 4 beats, guitar and clarinet add a major third, B and D sharp. Finally, the muted brass, again joined with the guitar, add a perfect fourth, A and D natural. Altogether, these sounds create B dominant 7 sharp 9 with A in the bass. We've had a fair amount of experience with these sharp 9 harmonies in the project thus far, so you know how juicy, even jazzy, these chords are. Towards the end of this introduction, the timpani crescendos represented by a tremolo of the octave A naturals. Above, the brass punctuate the end of this intro with a syncopated figure in 16th notes. This punctuation forms part of a rhythmic motif heard several times in the bass register, starting now. The timpani plays solo, repeated 8th notes, ending with the syncopated figure on the note F sharp. This motif is answered by an urgent 3-part harmony in the muted brass. At the outset, they are joined by the guitar strumming a G minor chord. The upper notes of the brass are the same fourths as in the intro, and they dart up a minor third and back. Simpson dares to play with dissonance here, as the lower note of the 3-part ensemble mixes with sounds outside the G minor harmony. The first of these notes, A flat, bristles tartly against both the A natural of the brass and the G natural of the guitar. The second of these notes, F sharp, has its own tartness with the upper 2 brass notes, and together they resemble a sharp 9 structure on D natural. These elements, the timpani motif and the 3-part ensemble with guitar, are heard in alternation 3 times. On top of that, a third element is more intermittent. A flute-clarinet duo interject a descending line in tritone intervals, outlining D dominant 7 flat 5. These notes echo those dissonances in the brass ensemble. By intermittent, I mean that this line is heard once over the timpani motif and a second time over the brass ensemble instead. The music discussed so far covers the opening scene in space, zeroing in on the Earth, and the subsequent focus on the radar tracking station. As the second repeat of the flute-clarinet line ends, the ensemble continues with a concluding chorale that signals a further focus onto the radar technician, tired and sweaty from the heatwave. Starting with one more repeat of the urgent brass chords, the cello now joins for a 4th part. Here, the melodic line of the muted trumpet is pleasantly bluesy, and like the sharp 9 harmonies, presages the music of Elizabeth Shaw, scientist, which in the story will be heard in about 2.5 minutes. With E natural in the cello, the 3 parts above condense from dominant 7, flat 5 to minor major 7. Next, the sharp 9 on D natural is reformed, but with C sharp in the cello. Then it concludes by shifting down to sharp 9 on B natural, echoing the harmony of the introduction. This harmony holds while the timpani re-enters, playing its rhythmic motif on B, and the ensemble accents the same chord to end the measure. The timpani plummets to F natural, and a wonderful chord by the guitar, vibes, and flute sound a dominant flat 5 chord plus an added note, E natural, the major 7th of F. This new clustered harmony gives things a nice jolt. Now, roughly coinciding with the radar screen displaying multiple contacts, the trumpet and flute erupt with a jagged line made of perfect fourths and half steps, and implied within are disturbing tritones. While the trumpet holds its high E flat, the flute continues in syncopated pairs of tritones, which, like the earlier duet with the clarinet, implies a whole tone scale. Interestingly, this scale does not contain the trumpet's E flat. There is perhaps a little bit of indulgence here in my arrangement. I double everything at the octave and allow all 4 notes of the ascending trumpet line to briefly ring together in the left hand. Sounds good, right? In response to this climax, the solo cello sinks in tritones, then sets off on its own 4-measure section, underscoring the technician calling for the duty officer urgently. Answered irregularly by pairs of brass tritones, the cello repeats a set of 4 notes in varying rhythms, and these notes suggest the octatonic scale. Concluding with the syncopated punctuation, the timpani joining the cello this time, a more subdued version of the trumpet-flute eruption, here played by flute and clarinet, roughly corresponds with another view of the radar and the duty officer arriving. The same idea is played a 5th lower than earlier, and the flute's syncopated pairs begin a half a beat earlier than before. Once again, the solo cello begins the new section with a transposed version of its 4-note cell, here starting on the lowest note of the previous version, B natural. This section underscores dialogue between the duty officer and the technician regarding the nature of the radar contacts. After the cello line settles on G natural, the flute-clarinet duo has the spotlight. They harmonize, firstly, in perfect fourths, with 1 major third. I can't help wondering if the major third was actually a mistake, considering the harmonization of the same note 2 notes later is a perfect fourth. Following another utterance by the cello, there's more parallel flute-clarinet lines, syncopated here, first in perfect fourths, then in descending major thirds. These too elicit a response by the cello. It's clear that the cello line exists independently of the flute-clarinet harmonies in terms of their scalar makeup. Although largely obscured, you can hear on the soundtrack the addition of a tambourine playing the rhythm of the timpani's motif under the flute-clarinet duo. Unfortunately, there was no satisfying musical way for me to add that to my arrangement. Inaugurating the duty officer's line to scan closer, a new 4-part chorale descends in parallel. The upper 3 notes are all major triads, with the major third on top. The lowest note, however, is a half step higher than the root of these triads, and together they perfectly outline the symmetry of the octatonic scale. Upon landing on a C major triad with a D flat below, the timpani-cello duo resumes the syncopated motif on C. This motif will support the ensemble's utterances for 8 measures. Curiously, up to this point, the music has been a touch slower, but here firmly pushes ahead to 120 beats per minute, although this tempo is not nearly as common then as it would become. The octatonic scale, meanwhile, generates 7 measures of this 8-measure phrase. After a resounding of the same chord, an E diminished 7 accents measure 3 of the section. Next, a legato phrase from the winds echoes the flute clarinet line from 8 measures earlier, starting and ending on C, dominant 7. A replying accent in measure 5 is another sharp 9 chord. After a brief respite with more C dominant 7s, measures 7 and 8 of this section feature more replying accents. An E-flat major triad resolves to a broken down version of the sharp 9 harmony. In the final measure, the same gesture is slightly altered. The first chord, now on beat 2 of the measure, is an augmented triad, so the previous B-flat becomes B natural. The resolving sharp 9 harmony adds back the minor 7th, B-flat again, absent in the first version. These chordal accents required the left hand to help out, briefly. With the radar technician answering, "But they're flying in formation." We cut to the meteorites streaming through the atmosphere, then a light upon the poacher, setting a trap while wiping the sweat from his brow. During this cut, a reprise of the earlier cello line with brass tritones is heard rhythmically compressed. To end the phrase, the cello descends further, chromatically landing on G sharp. The harmony above creates a dominant 7th chord with added 13th E sharp. Though even more colorful here, the basic structure is the same notes as the earlier D sharp 9 harmony. Simultaneously, a flute trills between A natural, the flat 9, and B sharp, the major 3rd. Here, as the poacher sets his trap, the vibraphone begins a tremolo of half steps played in my arrangement by alternating hands. The ensemble builds the tension starting from a tritone chord on the same G sharp. Next, up a tritone to D. Then a richer quartal sound on G sharp, adding the tritone D again, and the major 7th G natural. Throughout these added sounds, the tremolo is constant. As the poacher looks up to see the so-called meteorites screaming towards him, a climactic tremolo of thirds in the flute and clarinet screams as well. Below, the trumpet peaks on B natural, and in my arrangement, an aggregate chord of the ensemble supports it. The vibes tremolo, heard in the last 3 measures, continues in the soundtrack, but it wasn't possible to play that along with the flute tremolo, at least by me. Cutting to a shot of the meteorites in full plummet, the ensemble proclaims 3 unison B naturals, with a descending line adding musical color and suggesting the Phrygian mode of E, rather like a certain theme tune we all know. This leads to a final climax on E as the poacher dashes for cover, signaling the meteorites landing. A final tremolo in the vibes between the 4th and 5th of E makes suspended harmony. After 2 beats of silence, impact is signified simply by octave E in the lowest register. And as the poacher peeks out in fearful wonder, the ensemble gives a final chorale made mostly of augmented triads. With the cello's driving staccato 8th notes grounding us, this passage is almost all within the E whole tone scale. As the track comes to a close, the flute offers a surprising birdsong-like flourish, and this, as often happens, forced a bit of juggling in the arrangement. For example, one of the ensemble chords must be given to the left hand, and this is tricky anyway because of the cluster at the top requiring my left thumb to manage both white key and black key at the same time. Then, in the final measure, the flute's final trill, which begins on the downbeat in the soundtrack, must be delayed until I can finish the ensemble's phrase. Simpson's exciting, beautifully crafted music helps Season 7 get off to a cracking start. I hope you enjoyed the thoroughly close scanning of episode 55, part 2 of the Dudley Simpson is Doctor Who project. We're headed to the climax next time. An energetic thank you to my own unit family, my Patreons, who make videos like this happen and see them first. Please subscribe at patreon.com/Jess Jurkovic. Of course, any contribution gives me energy as well. Go to coffee.com/Jess Jurkovic and contribute once, whatever you feel. Subscribe, like, share, and comment on YouTube. Thanks, and see you next time.